I think we can, Zach, you want to start sharing your screen?
I do. Let me know when you can see my screen.
We see it.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, thanks everyone. You know, we're excited to be here. Great start to the conference so far. And then obviously the exciting news at noon today. You know, this is something like everyone's been talking about today. It's just pivotal in where we're going. So with the, you know, the huge news on signing of the infrastructure bill, Bill and I have been working together over the last 5 years on a CMGC project. And we see a lot of benefits with CMGC in terms of delivery and collaboration and other things. But one of the other things that we were talking about is CMGC is a great tool for managing what we've seen over the last several months with inflation and cost increases, but then also with supply shortages and the demands that are going on there. So we thought this would be a good topic to present to the group today. So just real quick on introductions. So I'm Zach Siviglia. I'm the CEO and president of Mark Thomas & Company. And like I mentioned, I've been working with Bill McGowan on one of our CMGC projects over the last 5 years in Santa Barbara with Margie and her team. So Bill, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me here today. Yeah, I work with Zach on the 101 project there in Santa Barbara. I'm the project manager for the Granite team and one member of the client designer contractor CMGC team.
Awesome. So what we did is we pulled together a presentation today, and we wanted to make sure that we allocate some time at the end for Q&A. Just to illustrate the point, you know, we pulled together an agenda of these topics for today. One is, why are we here? What is this topic about? And then for those that haven't worked through CMGC before, we wanted to go through a quick overview of what is CMGC, and then what are the benefits of it, and then how that process integrates into the pre-construction and then post-construction and then post-construction process. So this is going to be an interactive discussion between Bill and I as we go through the slides today. But I think as everyone has seen really over the last couple months, that inflation is a real thing. It's something that we've noticed in everything from how you buy gas to groceries to just things at the grocery store. And this is something that we're noticing in the construction area, the construction industry as well. So this is just a slide that shows that the CPI was up, 6.3% from this time last year. And what's important is just over the last month, it's up 1%. So as we're coming into the end of the year, we're really starting to see this increase faster. It's not been a linear progression over this year.
Yeah, Zach, on that slide, when I think about that from a contractor's perspective, and we're bidding work every day, we're getting prices in from suppliers, subcontractors. We're seeing this inflation happen right in front of our eyes, and we're having to react on bid day on making sure that we address this inflation and make sure that we address the trend of inflation and price escalation on projects.
Yeah, which is an important point, because the traditional way of doing our engineer's estimate is always looking at past data. We're looking back at prices that have come in before. And so when we're looking back, even if it's 1 month or 2 months, if we're not capturing the most current market rate prices, we're going to be in an issue potentially where on that bid day, there might be some surprise faces around the table. So one item that's really jumping up quite a bit is the cost of steel. So this chart, it's a little complicated to see, but what is shown in blue and all of these other colors here is just how steel prices fluctuate throughout the years. So this starts in 2002 on the left, and then it goes all the way through to October when we pulled this chart last. And so what you see is the cost of steel increasing really dramatically this year, as with a number of the other items that we'll get to in the next couple slides.
Yeah, and what I see on this slide, Zach, and of course I see this kind of explosive growth in steel pricing right now, but I also see these ups and downs in the steel market. And again, that's something we have to look at when we're pricing out projects for clients. We're saying, okay, steel is going through the roof right now. What is steel going to be 6 months, 12 months from now? And is there intel that suggests that this is just a blip or this is a long-term inflation? And can we adjust our purchasing to sort of get around this this temporary increase in steel? And as you see on this picture on the right here, we're not, looks like it's going through the roof, but it's going to change. So that's what we're looking at.
And so one of the other things that we want to look at, just to Bill's point, is while steel is going up, across the bottom of the slide here, you'll see that lumber prices have actually come down. I think everyone will remember, you know, a few months ago, if you went to Home Depot and you tried to buy a sheet of plywood, it was draining your pocketbook. It was extremely expensive. But the lumber prices are starting to normalize now as we come into, you know, the end of the year. So like Bill said, it's not just always looking at what's going up, it's being mindful of those other factors where you could actually be seeing some cost decreases depending on whatever that material is that's selected.
Yeah, it's a good point.
So what we wanted to do, you know, with that as the framework of, you know, where we are in the industry today, and then with the signing of the infrastructure bill, you know, how do we manage this, and how do we make sure that we're being efficient with the dollars that are being allocated to our projects, and then, you know, wanting to make sure we realize all that's in these various programs and accomplish the goals that are set out for us. So one of the things that I've appreciated about the CMGC process is it really does integrate the contractor into the design process. It's a little different. It's actually much different than how we would traditionally approach a design build project, which we'll get to in a few slides. But for those that haven't worked through CMGC before, one of the things that we wanted to highlight is just how this program works with the designer, the engineer, the contractor, and then the owner. So Bill, if you wanted to talk through just from your standpoint, just how you see this program working.
Sure, Zach. So, you know, CMGC is all about, you know, bringing the builder, the constructor into the design or pre-construction process. And so, and during that process, the builder acts as an advisor to the designer and to the owner, you know, kind of advising on the constructability of things, risk, innovative ideas for construction, things like that. And then as design wraps up, that builder who was the advisor moves into the contractor role, actual builder role, and gets the opportunity to carry forward, you know, all of that collaboration and transparency, as we'll talk about, that was taking place during pre-construction, carries that forward into the construction phase. So CMGC is all it is all about collaboration, but you know, unlike some other delivery methods, CMGC is the owner maintains full decision-making authority all the way through design, all the way through the construction process or contracting process. You know, in CMGC, you know, by bringing in that builder during the design or pre-construction phase, you get the benefit of that contractor's supply chain knowledge. Like we were talking about earlier with those graphs, you know, the supply chain right now is a little wobbly, to say the least. And so because we operate at that ground level with the supply chain on a daily basis, bringing that builder into pre-construction gets that expertise to the designer, to the owner, to make educated decisions. There's an Assembly Bill 1475 that was passed a few years back that allows all public agencies to use CMGC for project delivery here. They have to have, you know, local ordinances that allow it, but at the state level, that AB 1475 allows it. You know, some of the key tenets of CMGC, it's built on trust and transparency. It's you know, partnering and, you know, maintenance and obtaining, you know, full alignment between owner, designer, and contractor, you know, focused on the project. You know, what's best for the project is key to CMGC. And when you have all that, you get like full flexibility, you know, and Zach and I had an experience there on the 101 where there's a lot of different, forces at work, funding, different agencies at work, different communities that all need to be addressed. And then, of course, COVID and labor shortages and things like that. Well, CMGC allows, flexibility about, what is the scope of the project we're going to put out? What is the timing of that project that we're going to put out? And that flexibility allows us to kind of optimize the delivery of the overall project. That's what CMGC allows.
Yeah. And we'll touch on just a couple examples of that and how we've been able to use the program to take advantage of available funding or to really, look at separating the project components to eliminate potential risks to the project. So we'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. But as an overview and just again, highlighting the differences between the various delivery methods. So the traditional method, which is shown on the left, is that design bid build, where the designer and the general contractor are both working for the owner. And we go through, we design the project, and then it goes out to bid and you select the low bid contractor. Design build is everything is under one umbrella with that design build team. Like Bill mentioned, the challenge there is that a lot of the control and the risk is transferred over to the design build team. So the decisions that are being made are not necessarily in the best interest of the owner. It's working through that negotiation with the design build team. CMGC is very similar in terms of reporting structure that we would have with traditional design bid build. Both the designer and the contractor work directly for the owner, but we have contractual requirements to coordinate as a team through the various delivery milestones. So during a 65% plan review or 90% plan review, we're working directly with the CMGC contractor during pre-construction services. And then there's also another independent cost estimator called ICE that we have as another resource to our team. So all three of us have a reporting directly to the owner, and we work collaboratively to get the best project and work through the various risks that we see.
Oh.
So just in terms of how this lays out, again, like I mentioned just at the top, from design bid build, we go through the entire design phase, we bid it, and then it's off into construction. Design build, there's a preliminary design aspect of it, and then you go through a very long procurement. And Bill, some of these are a year just to work through the procurement for the design build team.
Mm-hmm. They can be. I mean, it's the procurement process, it's just qualifications that you're selecting against, but you're also making sure that the design builder that you may be hiring fully understands the risk that's being transferred, that the scope of the design builder's price is based on is adequate. It's a time-consuming process.
And then once that procurement is made, then it's starting the final design and then working through the design build process. CMGC, you go through preliminary design phase. We go through a much shorter procurement with the contractor because it's just qualification-based selection, which we'll get to in a couple minutes. And then we're working with them through the final design. But in this moment, like we've highlighted across the bottom of the slide, there's potential for early work packages or early actions. So if we needed to clear some vegetation to avoid permit issues or get started on a certain item of work for utility relocations, we have that flexibility with the program.
Yeah, you can really move the construction critical path left on the timeline with the flexibility of CMGC. I like this picture. I like the diamonds that are shown there between the final design bar and the pre-con services bar. And those indicate the design milestones, say like 30, 60, 90, or 100%. And those are the points where the contractor is getting the current design, doing a full constructability review, risk analysis, innovation analysis, and then pricing and schedule on the current state of design. And then we're reconciling with the design team and the owner, saying, hey, this is where we are. These are opportunities for change and improvement. And then there's action planning so that we can further optimize the design as we move forward to the next design milestone. And that iterative process, as we march through the design milestones, is what makes the designs better, more durable, more constructible, less prone to change, more flexibility for getting around supply chain issues like we talked about earlier. All of that can be addressed during the design phase rather than waiting for that end of the bid phase, like you see up on the design bid build line there, to figure out what you got. You know, if you're an owner and you're wondering, hey, is this project going to come in under budget? Well, with the CMGC process, you get a look. You get several looks as the design evolves. But in the design bid build, you get one look. And in a volatile market like we have here today, that look may be disappointing. So it's kind of some of the benefits of CMGC.
Yeah, and I think this slide really shows how that works practically. If you look at the various milestones, so starting on the left there, shows all the various entities that are involved, from the ICE, the owner, the designer, and the CMGC contractor, and then working through those milestone submittals. So like Bill mentioned, at each one, if we're at 60% and we see that a certain item of work based on pricing is coming back really high, we have that flexibility to look at modifying the design before the next submittal. So it could be something as dramatic as changing from a steel to a concrete structure, or something that's more routine and just trying to purchase equipment or materials earlier in the process. And at each one of these milestones, we also do a full risk assessment where we're looking at not just, what are the potential risks, but actually putting dollars and schedule delays associated with each one of those items.
And the concept about risk is to, after we've identified the risk, we've quantified it, we've established a probability of occurrence, we then prioritize those risks and we develop action plans for designing out risk or mitigating it or avoiding it one way or another. That, again, as we march through those design milestones, we're able to really drive down risk on the project.
Yeah, and I think having the team that's working together, I mean, that's so important to have a team that's built, like Bill mentioned earlier, that you trust what they're telling you, right? We trust each other to work through to get the best available product. And so what I like about this slide is it shows us all coming together at the end for that agreed to price and schedule for the project. Bill, I'll let you touch on this slide.
Yeah, okay, I'd be happy to. I mean, I kind of like this slide. It talks about risk profile for the different delivery methods. They're the one column for design, bid, build, where, owner takes most of the risk associated with the scope, whether there's scope growth or different site conditions and things like that. The owner working in a kind of siloed environment with the designer, develop a design. They put together, a full set of plans and specs, and then put it out to bid. Contractor then bids just on that plans and specs and takes the risk associated with, productivity and maybe labor availability. But nevertheless, we don't take any of that risk associated with, scope growth or scope changes. So that's the traditional design bid build. In the design build, that's the middle column there. The owner is transferring that design risk and construction risk to the design builder, but they are also relinquishing a lot of the control over the design. It's like, hopefully we've conveyed to the design builder everything we want. Hope it's clear in there, but sometimes there's a difference in perception. So design build has that risk. It's a risk transfer. I don't think it's really lowered the risk on the overall project. It just kind of transferred it to the design builder. Now, CMGC, you can see it's much more collaborative design process. It's bringing in the builder during the design process, identifying risk, mitigating them as you march through the design milestones and driving down risk on the job. I think you can actually lower the risk. And then, as you can see, these the stacked bars are about the same because risk can be allocated based on a transparent discussion between the owner and contractor, and really based on who's able to manage that risk better. And there's a lot of decisions that can be made. rather than like on a design bid build job where a contractor might say, well, I don't really get a chance to change the specs. So I'm just going to have to carry some risk in my price for it. And that's the way it's going to be. In the CMGC world, we get to, alert the owner to a risk and the amount of contingency a contractor should carry for risk. And then the owner gets to make some decisions about, well, maybe I'll carry that risk. And then we'll work together to mitigate it and manage it and drive it down, even during the construction phase. So that's the beauty of CMGC, where you can kind of look at risk from a three-dimensional, 360-degree perspective and figure out who's best for owning that risk during the construction phase.
Yeah, so as we move on, just to give again an overview on how this process works from a procurement standpoint. So in terms of selecting the CMGC contractor, typically we've found that it's beneficial to bring them in as soon as possible. You want to at least have enough project definition. So typically right around that 30-35% level project report, have enough project definition to know where the project is going. But immediately after the P&ED phase, there's a good opportunity to bring in the CMGC contractor at that point. It is based on qualifications where you're being able to select the individual team members that are being proposed for the project. And then the pre-construction services contract with the CMGC contractor works very similar to a design contract where they're paid just based on time and expenses for their employees. So it's very similar to how that process works. And at the end of it, there's no guarantee that they get the construction phase. This is working with them to negotiate on an agreed to price, but they do have that option through the procurement to be extended into the construction phase. And like I mentioned, the cost is traditional, like how we would handle a normal design contract, which is typically cost plus fixed fee.
Yeah, I think that the important part is the qualifications based. I mean, if there's one secret to CMGC, it's making sure you get the right people on the team, just like picking a designer, picking the people. Same with the contractor in CMGC.
So one of the questions that we get a lot is, what projects are well suited for this delivery method? Because not all projects fit within this. Not all projects need that level of input during the design phase. So what we've found is that traditionally it's projects that have, some complexity to them. So either complex delivery, complex design with staging, multiple stakeholders, right-of-way issues, something that has a very tight budget where we're trying to make sure we fit within that budget. And then something that has usually schedule challenges where, there's multiple segments or there's key items, key ramps, key segments of the road that need to be maintained during construction. So those are things that we would typically look at for a project that would be well suited for CMGC.
Yeah, I mean, if just kind of practically speaking, a lot of CMGC jobs kind of come out of this thought from the owner's perspective, like, boy, there's just a lot of variability on how this job would be constructed. I really don't know, what the timing's going to be. Or in a situation like a volatile labor or commodity market, it's like, how are we going to get around this and still deliver our project if there's funds coming at a certain rate? I can feel those challenges. We're experiencing them on 101. There's some money there, but we have to figure out a way to use it to keep the project going and get the most value out of it. And CMGC allows that to happen.
So as we, just move on and talk about just overall benefits of it, I think one of the things that I see as the primary benefit is that there is cost certainty as you work towards executing that agreement for the construction phase, especially in times like this where things are changing. As you're working through the various milestone submittals and opinion of probable cost estimate reviews, we know where the cost is going. So we have an opportunity where if something does seem to be out of alignment with what we expect, we have that opportunity to work as a team to figure out how do we get around that? What can we change to make that cost that item fit within the available budget that we have. And it could be that we look at segmenting the project, or there's other things that we could do, but we know what that's going to be and that we have to design around that as a team. Like Bill mentioned, we do get to work through an overall risk reduction. So this isn't just identifying a risk and then if it comes up, we know we're going to get a change order. This is something where as a team, we look to mitigate this risk. So for one of our segments of the project, there's a concern about the piling having a detrimental effect to one of the slopes that we were working next to. So we came up with a design solution that avoided that risk, and that work went off. There was no issues there, but that was recognized through this effort that we worked with. And we needed to know, what type of equipment would be doing that in order to make sure that we don't have that issue show up during construction. Optimized design is another aspect where we're being able to design the project to fit with the contractor's equipment. A lot of times we pick a design based on, what we see as the best, available design, but there's other things that could be done to fit within the contractor's equipment and labor and their, specific operations. And then lastly, just stakeholder satisfaction. I think Margie touched on it earlier today during the CEO roundtable portion. But the 101 project is a very complex project and it involves multiple stakeholders. And overall, the project is moving forward very well. And that's because there's been so much work that's gone into the planning aspect of things.
Yeah, these are all great benefits of CMGC. A couple of things I'd like to add to that is the reduction in the amount of assumptions that the owner designer would have to carry through to the construction phase. CMGC drives that down. They aren't assumptions when the contractor's involved in the solution. They're actually commitments that are carried forward into construction. And when you transform assumptions to commitments, things go off well. There's no changes, there's no differences of opinion, there's no disputes over, I thought you meant that. And then on stakeholder satisfaction, along the same lines, by having the builder involved in sort of the goal setting phase of the PS&E and say, hey, we're going to set some goals around stakeholder satisfaction, set some goals around quality and safety and things like that. Those goals then, rather than trying to write specs that, sort of like by method meet those goals transfer over into the construction phase too. So if stakeholder satisfaction is a goal set during the PS&E phase by the contractor who's involved, that goal transfers right over into construction and becomes a reality rather than having some sort of a method spec or performance criteria around those types of things. So you can still do that, but there's something powerful about having that goal established collaboratively during pre-construction.
So what we wanted to do is, really open it up to see if there's any questions from the group here today as we look at just general pre-construction services that are typical with CMGC delivery. Like we've been touching on earlier, there's constructability and innovation, really refining the design, staging and segment integration, where we have multiple segments, what's the best way of doing that? Early work packages, so being able to be flexible, take advantage of those opportunities. The market competitive pricing, making sure that we know what that cost is going to be and not being surprised on bid day. And then overall risk reduction, from improving the safety during construction for the users and the contractor, and then reducing the risk of the overall project. So we wanted to pause here and see if there were any questions before we continue.
Hi, Zach and Bill. This is Josue from Orange County Transportation Authority. Great presentation. It's a great topic. It does get a lot of attention. Just curious, I know you presented on trust and transparency, but I realized some of the members of your client are also here with Santa Barbara Council of Associated Governments. Could they provide their perspective on that aspect of building trust?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Is that me?
Yes.
Or I'm not,
Margie.
Great.
I'm not sure who else is on. Is Fred on as well? I don't see him. But did you want me to get that, Zach?
Definitely. I would love it.
Okay. I think the main difference in CMGC is as a funding partner in this whole thing. Normally, I don't hear about anything going wrong until the very end where they say, oh, there's a $10 million cost overrun and you have to find the extra dollars somehow, some way. I'm like, oh crap, where am I going to find that? So this is totally different. I feel like, like Bill said, we did develop goals and objectives ahead of time. We have an audacious team or whatever we're calling this. And so we do have those goals formed together. And part of that team process is solving the problems as they come up. So when a problem arises, we figure out what we can do about it and where we can mitigate and try to alleviate any cost overruns as much as possible and be part of the solution. It's not necessarily an us or them situation. It's a we have to solve this problem together. It's not just the contractor's problem. It's not just Caltrans problem. It's not just the funding problem. It's overall working together. And I think having that engagement, I think this is probably the most engaged I've ever been in the delivery of a project. I've been on a lot of PDT meetings and, working things forward. But once it gets to construction, I'm usually done. And so this time it feels better. I feel ownership of the project and I'm on the front lines. I know when a problem is coming up, so I can talk to my people and saying, hey, we're on it. We know that there was an accident or something that was caused, or an accident that happened, and we might be able to mitigate that. So we also, we're able to, I think one of the on-ramps had a really long or really short off ramp. And so we were able to make that longer because people were feeling afraid getting off and on. So those communications are happening, and that having that as a goal of being upfront about the problems and with the public and addressing them as quickly as possible has raised our integrity as well as project delivery and listening to the public. Okay, I think that was way longer than I expected to be, but I'll shut up now and mute myself.
Right on.
No, I think you're right on, Margie. And, Josue, just to add to that a little bit, one of the things I just wanted to mention is that there's multiple layers of communication and partnering that are going on. So that, like Margie said, she's involved in these decisions. And then we have, very tactical aspects where people are actually drawing the lines and trying to figure out what's the best design fit for this, all the way up to what's the best for the community and the stakeholders. So there's multiple layers where we're having those discussions all the way through the process, as opposed to just hearing the complaint at the end.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Hi, this is Steve Dial from San Joaquin Council of Governments. And by the way, thank you for the comment on my photo. I want to take Margie's comment just a little bit farther. Do you actually have any experience in being able to determine the degree of claims that arise at the end of this process versus the end of the normal design, bid, build process?
I can, Steve, I can speak anecdotally from Granite's perspective, and we've done over 30 of CMGC jobs. We haven't had any claims. No claims. We have change orders that are just non-disputed associated with, how we decided to carry a risk into construction, but we've never had disputes that went to claim. Very rarely do we even bring things to a DRB. I'm not familiar with a DRB from Granite's perspective. So there's kind of a hard-coded alignment that's established in pre-construction that when you're doing it right, it goes right to construction. When you involve, not only have the builder involved in construction, but you also involve the RE staff. They say the Caltrans construction people, they're involved in pre-construction as well. We've established a lot of alignment around how issues or how parts of the project, when they play out, how it's going to go. And because of that, there's just no disputes that would certainly not get anywhere near a claim.
That would be helpful. I can see why she's very comfortable with the project.
Yeah.
I think also the public engagement components of that too for claims from public is also reduced through just the engagement that we have of the teams that Zach had mentioned. So I'm on the public information side. I work with our public outreach consultants that work with the community, and because everyone's working together, we can mitigate problems too for the public as well.
Thanks, Lauren. And Steve, just on your question in terms of claims versus change orders, like Bill mentioned, when we go through the risk assessment at the end of the design phase, right before we move into construction, there is a approved risk register. And it's basically an if then. So if this item pops up, here is the cost that's associated with it. And so we're planning for it so that you're not in that position where you're trying to negotiate once that issue does arise. And that cost that's identified on the risk register has been vetted through the owner side and the ICE and the designer. So there's multiple reviews on that before it's ever finalized, so that everyone is comfortable with the cost that's shown on that risk register.
Great.
Hey, Alex, can I have market competitive and estimating and pricing for 500, please? It's kind of a Jeopardy screen there.
We got it, Bill. You're so funny. Good one.
Yeah. Thanks, Margie. I wondered if people got that. So I think this is a question that goes through a lot of people's head. You know, CMGC, you know, it might be perceived as you know, sole sourcing a construction contract, and you know, maybe there aren't enough, you know, market forces at work there. So maybe, and this slide kind of talks about how we get to agreed price. Of course, you know, you can see estimate 1, 2, and 3. Those are full estimates that the contractor, the independent cost estimator, quite frankly, the designer will perform at each of the design milestones. And there's a full reconciliation process that goes on at each of those milestones. You know, we actually come together and figure out why there's a difference. And the independent cost estimator is usually made up of people from the industry. So they're bottom-up estimators, just like the contractor is too. You know, they look at things from labor, equipment, materials, and from a productivity perspective. And then, so everything's looked at. So, and you do it 4 times. Also, on a typical highway job, you know, that usually 40 to 70% of a highway scope is subcontracted out. Now that work was obtained, or pricing on that work is obtained from the market. So that's market driven. So we'll be reaching out to subcontractors to get pricing on various elements of the work. And like I said, on a highway job, that's a fair percentage of it. And of course, at the bottom bullet down here, that's as Zach mentioned earlier, there always is the off ramp for an owner to take. We're just not going to make an agreement here. We're just not going to reach agreement. And then they can take that completed set of plans that were optimized and had the builder's advice during the PS&E process, and they can put those plans out to bid to the market. So that's always there. That's always there to kind of make sure everybody stays in tight, to make sure there's a fair price for the work. So all of that combined gives CMGC, you know, some comfort in the CMGC delivery that there is some market pricing in there.
Yeah. Todd, I saw that you had your hand raised. I just wanted to see if you had a question.
I did have a question. Thank you, Zach. I'm using the Santa Cruz using the Santa Barbara project as this example. I'm not quite sure exactly what Mark Thompson's role is overall. I mean, I know generally, but a little more detail on what Mark Thomas's role versus Granite's role, and where you first were involved in the project.
Yeah, great question. So Mark Thomas, I'm the design manager for the northern segment of the project. So overall, the Santa Barbara 101 project is 11 miles. And then that design was split between Caltrans internal staff, are designing the southern half of the project. And then Mark Thomas was hired by SB CAG to design the northern portion of the project, the northern 5-6 miles. So I'm the design lead for the northern portions of the projects, which are our 4C, 4D, and 4E segments is how we've defined them. And so my role is working with our design team and coordinating with Bill and the pre-construction folks on his team, and then also Caltrans as design oversight. So we're preparing the plans, we're working through the RTL process with Caltrans, and ultimately coordinating with Bill to get the project out to construction. So there's a lot of weekly meetings that we have. Tuesdays are identified always for this project because we have multiple meetings stacked up on Tuesday to make sure that we're touching on every single one of those items that needs to be checked off before we get to construction. And then we have, for the segments that are in construction, we have the design support phases of that during construction. So responding to RFIs or those items.
And do you have any role on the southern sections that Caltrans is the lead on design?
We've developed a really strong partnership. So the design manager for the southern segment and I coordinate all the time and we'll run ideas past each other. We have no formal role on the southern portion because that's the way that the division of work was split. But even with that, we've developed a really good partnership so that the design manager will reach out to me and say, hey, what do you think about this? Because I see this kind of this way and that way. Which way would you go? And I like having the same ability on the northern segment because ultimately it's one corridor. So we want to make sure that the designs are consistent across all segments. So there's a lot of that partnership that goes on, even if we don't have a formal review role on the southern segments. Okay. All right, and I can't see if there's hands raised. So Roya, if you want to let me know if you see anything else.
Looks like L Cross is up.
Yes, this is Laura Cross with OCTA, project manager in the rail division. So a couple questions. So the procurement is actually one for the general contractor and one for the designer. Does the designer typically do the independent cost estimating, or is there a third procurement?
There is a third procurement. So there's 3 independent estimates that are done at each level. So the designer, we will have our engineer's estimate. There's a separate company that is hired to do the independent cost estimate. And like Bill mentioned, those are typically folks that have gone through the construction industry, that have a history with bidding projects, so they know how to price projects from a contractor side. And then there's the third side of that, which is the CMGC contractor. So 3 independent companies all working with the same owner. And then the estimating process is a blind estimating process. The only entity that sees all 3 estimates is the owner. And that's done to make sure that there's, you know, a fair assessment of each one of those estimates. And, you know, we want to see where are there differences. And so typically, Laura, what we'll see is, you know, it's called a delta sheet, where we see an item that's greater than 10% off. But we don't know if that item is Bill's 10% high or Bill's 10% low. We just know that there's a difference there. And with that, it's a really good opportunity to talk across all 3 of us and see where is the difference, how are you seeing it versus how are we seeing it, and then where can we come into alignment.
Okay, so negotiations can happen even after the contractor has submitted his price.
Yeah, so the way it
Okay.
typically works is we go through, during like each one of those OPCC's reviews,
Mhm.
we'll do first a quantity reconciliation meeting. So we will estimate all the quantities on the project, as will the ICE and the CMGC. We all agree on what the quantities are. And then there's the separate step, which is the price reconciliation. So we all submit our estimates to the owner. We get back this sheet that shows a delta between each one of those items. And then it's usually a couple days to work through that process to figure out where is that delta and how do we come into alignment. and then you submit that final estimate again to the owner for review.
Okay, and then one other question. Before you get to the nuclear option, as you call it here in your list, how is the contractor paid? I'm assuming that that's time and material, so you've negotiated that cost up front. And what would be a good percentage of, how as the owner would we be able to estimate what that cost would be?
Bill, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the pre-construction services are, Laura, are usually paid on a time and materials basis. And as a rule of thumb, it's usually around 1% of the contract construction value. It can be a little less, it can be a little bit more, depending on the complexity of the job, how far the design is advanced when the CMGC enters the picture. But usually Caltrans uses around the 1% range.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Jim, it looks like your hand's up as well.
Yeah, thank you. My question's kind of kept circulating around the process of the application of risk. Standard stuff, risk register, looking at probability of time and cost, but I'm assuming you're inputting that all into a model. And what do you do, or what probability are you accepting out of a risk model overall for the project cost and schedule? And how are you deciding to assign the tough risks that are unassignable?
Yeah.
Are you making allotments to cover them? Or is there true builder's risk being assigned that's taken on by the contractor? Okay, just talk a little more about application of risk and how you assign that.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Like you said, you go through a standard process, you follow the same framework as a risk register, where you're looking at what is that risk, and then what is the probability of it occurring? And then if it does occur, who really is best suited to own that risk? If it's a field condition that no one has any idea that could present itself. So if it's something that you have subgrade issues where all of the geotech borings have shown there would be no issue, but if it presents itself, then at least we've gone through the process to try to identify that. And if there is a differing site condition, typically the owner is best suited to handle that risk. But we have a design and a process worked out for how to deal with differing site conditions. Whereas on the owner or on the contractor side, if there's potential delays for X reason, if the contractor is best suited to own that risk, then that risk is allocated to them during the construction phase so that there would not be any potential cost change, because that's really the contractor's risk to manage during construction. And Bill, did you want to touch on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I could give an example, Jim. We on the 101 corridor, we have an on-site concrete batch plant for all of the concrete paving.
I saw it.
And when we were pricing the job out, there was just a radical difference between ready mixed concrete and on-site batched. But the permitting, the air quality permitting on that on-site batch was so risky and so indeterminate, such that we couldn't, bake that into our price. We'd have to carry a big contingency in case it failed or it was delayed for a long time. So we as a team said, you know what, let's go ahead, let's put that into our price. Let's go ahead and put that batch plant into the price of driving the cost down, but let's put on the risk register what happens if it's delayed and who would carry the cost of that delay. So in this case, Caltrans said, well, we'll carry the cost. You just put the low cost in there, and then we'll work with you with the air quality and air permitting district and the county and everything like that to try to get that permit. And as such, we didn't have to bury that cost in the estimate. There was no big contingency carried. We managed to get the permit, and then collaboratively got the permit. Now we have a batch plant on site. On a bid build type project or even a design build project, we wouldn't have a batch plant on site because we wouldn't be able to manage that risk together as a team.
Yeah, thanks. And that leads into just a follow-up question on mine in regards, and maybe it's more of a a Santa Barbara question is on the budgeting side. You know, there's very distinct differences, of course, between the highway side from the Caltrans budgeting process and how things are programmed versus an FTA side on a more of a transit project, and how you estimate and work with FTA on the grant. Could be very different spectrums in how you budget. How is San Bernardino then budgeting for that higher modeled risk up front, or are they taking the risk that they may not, the risk may not happen?
Yeah, the budgeting, it is budgeted, Jim, based on that total risk. So in traditional projects, what you would do is you do the estimate plus a contingency, and that's what you use to program the project.
Right.
On this side, you're programming the project based on the agreed to price and the risk that's identified on the risk register. So that's allocated in the event that those issues come up. But if they don't come up, then that money is just set aside and it can be rolled forward onto the next project.
Oh, that's good.
I just got a reminder that there's only 5 minutes left, and I know we have, some bid sessions to move on to after this. I want to just close by saying, I really appreciate everyone joining us today. I want to turn the presentation over to Roya and Miriam, who's going to go through the fun raffle prizes. But, just to close out from my standpoint as a designer, I really do appreciate this model, this delivery method. It really has allowed us to get the best out of working with the construction industry in our design. I've seen the benefits of it. I think Margie touched on some of the benefits that her agency has seen. It really has helped for these types of complex projects. So if there's more questions, because I know we only had an hour, feel free to reach out to Bill or I, and we can definitely help get back to you with any other questions that you have. But with that, Roya, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you.
Okay,
All right.
so I'll let Miriam announce the winners while I spin the wheel.
Let's spin it. Let's do the first gift card real quick.
I like the sound effects.
Oh, Maggie.
Maggie. Second gift card.
Genie.
Genie, yay. Let's do the big prize. AirPods.
Laura.
Lauren.
Great. So Miriam, you will
Wonderful.
take the lead in getting all of those out to everyone.
For
And again,
sure.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, for sure. We will get those prizes out. Great presentation, great questions, and everybody here I think knows how to get a hold of me. So if there's any questions, I'll make sure that they're going to get answered. So just feel free to reach out. And yeah, I mean, we're 2 minutes to 2, so everybody can get back to all the other interesting presentations that focus. And hopefully next year it's going to be in person, and we'll have some nice presentation or something more fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was fun. This was all fun.
This was super fun.
Zach, you did a great job. Zach and Bill, great job. Thank you so much, guys.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
coming.
for all that you do.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.